Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you, wherever and whenever this podcast may find you. My name is Dustin. I'm the host of the Did You Know podcast. Welcome. And today we're going to be talking to the ever interesting and just intellectually stimulating Chris Deroise, who I really enjoy anytime that I can kind of ingest his content, and was very happy to be able to have him on the podcast. We talk about a variety of topics from leadership in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a natural Ponzi. We'll explain Bitcoin being punk rock, counterculture, introspection in Bitcoin. A lot of different topics, and it was a great conversation. I enjoyed it and I loved it, and I hope that you guys will, and I know that you guys will enjoy it as much as I did. If first you could do me a quick favor, head over to iTunes, leave a 5-star and a written review. That is a really huge help, to making the podcast better well known. It really does help with the algorithms in Apple to have people listening to it and reviewing it. So anytime that you can do that, I would appreciate it. If you could also head over to eToro at didyouknowcrypto.com/eToro, eToro, and sign up there. You'll get $50 for free to trade for Bitcoin. They offer innovative tools and a audience and a community of 11 million other traders to be able to pass around topics and things and news and strategies, charting, and all this other kind of stuff. So if you are a trader, it's a great place to trade. You can also now, if you are a trader, make your star bigger. And what that will do is actually people who are not such good traders, who see that you actually provide value, they will copy your trades. And that sounds like a bad deal, but it's not. Actually, what it does is they copy your trades that you make public as a public trader, and then you get a cut of all their profits. It's actually one of the better deals out there. It's actually really, really cool. So head over to didyouknowcrypto.com/eToro. And the last thing is, you guys should be using a VPN. I do, and I exclusively use NordVPN. And this is not a pitch for any kind of affiliate link for myself at all. What I'm actually offering you is 75% off plus 1 month free for their 3-year deal for NordVPN. It's easy. I use it on desktop. They have a mobile app, and you can set it to just connect automatically and a bunch of other stuff. It's actually really, really cool. I think you guys are going to really like it. And that's offered for free to all of my listeners. If you go to supportmypodcast.com and you click on the listener discounts option, it's going to list all the discounts that I've been able to get for you guys. These are absolutely free. I don't want money for it or anything like that. This is just a free service that I offer to all my listeners. So take advantage of it. Go over there. Use my promo codes. You can get stuff like Tracers, Keep Keys, Bitcoin merchandise, health food like mushroom coffee, Bitcoin tax software, a bunch of other stuff. It's all absolutely free. It's free promos. Just go there. You click on what you're interested in, copy the promo, use it, done. So head over to supportmypodcast.com. And once again, I'd really like to, thank you guys for listening. You are the most important part of this podcast. Absolutely, because I could be providing the best content ever. And if I don't have listeners, it means absolutely nothing. So you guys are the ones who are actually responsible for all the success that we've had. I'm very happy with the numbers. We've broken over 1,000 listeners. So I really appreciate that. Thanks, guys. Enjoy the show. Today, I'd like to welcome Chris Deroise, co-host of the OG Bitcoin podcast, Bitcoin Uncensored, a thought-provoking speaker, and a Bitcoin professional. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So the first question I will ask is probably, I think, the most important one really in Bitcoin, and one that I don't think really gets talked about so much because people seem to kind of just have a very set idea on what it is, depending on what camp that they fall into. But what is Bitcoin?
God, there's so many easy answers, and I don't know if you want a complicated one or not. The easy answer is it's a digital currency. It's probably the best and easiest, but it's clearly a movement. It's a quasi-decentralized community united by varying forms of malcontent and libertarian aspirations towards this goal of sound money, whatever that might be. I think that's a rough overview.
Okay. The first question that I wanted to ask you was, and I can't remember if this was something that you mentioned on the episode that we did, I guess over a year ago now, on the kind of the outcome of the hash wars, or if it was just another talk. But you described, that Bitcoin as being punk rock, and you couldn't understand how squares with kids and jobs could be in Bitcoin, and that it's kind of really not for them. And at first, I guess I was a bit taken aback or bothered by it, and probably likely by my bias, since I am that perfectly described square with kids and a job and everything. But I've actually come to kind of appreciate that point more recently, as I kind of see this attempt to professionalize Bitcoin into kind of this box as a place where the edgy, adventurous Wall Street types go, and you wear suits, but you have fun socks, and that's not, to me, that's not Bitcoin. And I've come to appreciate comment of Bitcoin being punk rock. So what does that mean? And how are these guys kind of getting Bitcoin wrong?
Yeah, for me, I think a lot of the appeal of Bitcoin has been in this sort of like cypherpunk kind of movement, or maybe like the notion of the chit in various science fiction literature. These sort of romanticized online communities that were standing in opposition to the man. I think that that was a lot of the allure and the magic, even for me. And in so in so being that kind of a movement, I think that much of the professionalism, so to speak, was antithetical to that goal. I don't think that the value in the underground was to be found in banks. It was a response to banks. And that's subjective. Everyone can come around and do what they will with this stuff. But that's how it kind of spoke to me. And it sort of filled its legacy in that sense early on with what I consider to be the killer app, that of Silk Road. And even from there, I would say the killer app is money, but in many ways, various forms of subversive online activity, all of which is not necessarily a peaceful and I don't know, pleasing kind of application. It's very much in your face. It's a sort of youth spirit that I found very compelling, and that I even think is very noble in many ways. But when the bankers came and they wanted to get in, I mean, it was exciting in the sense that like you have money coming in now that was substantially greater than what was there prior. But it also came with a lot of strings attached, which I don't think the community's really come to deal with yet.
No, I don't think so. And I to take your point on, kind of being subversive and underground. I think it is very much akin to the kind of that punk rock spirit where, I mean, aficionados of punk will kind of, they have a real issue with kind of the commercialization of it afterwards, and that wasn't really the
Right.
true punk. And I think Bitcoin as well, to an extent, whereas um, another podcaster and a person that I listen to, Michael Malice, always talks about how the in his, I think he goes through it in his new book too as well, that the fringes is where culture is created, the kind of the underground, a lot of times where a minority culture resides in a society is where culture is created, and then that filters in things like jazz, hip hop, and a lot of pretty much anything else you see that kind of filters in, at least in American society, has always done so on the fringes. And I think that's what Bitcoin, definitely within its cypherpunk days, it was a fringe movement. And even to an extent, if you kind of look at the amount of people involved and what's kind of, we still are pretty fringe, I'd guess, but I'd say that the edges are becoming a little bit more rounded on the table there with
Agreed.
Bitcoin. But it is a little bit sad in a way that I do, I agree that it is nice when you see kind of people of respectability, I guess, coming in and giving kind of their respectability to something that was called unworkable. But then at the same time, I think that brings a real, what do you want to call it? It's a real temptation for a lot of people to want to live up to that. They watch Wall Street with Gordon Gekko back in the day, and they kind of always wanted to be that guy with the in the penthouse, and there is that possibility within Bitcoin, that temptation is kind of there, and to me, it is kind of sad to see, and I don't know if there's really a course correction that can change that.
I don't think there is within Bitcoin. I don't think that's necessarily bad even. I do think that Monero is offering much of that right now. So if you want that, you can go there. And presumably other blockchains are offering something even close. So I, like at some levels, I think that's good. But there's a lot that's caught up in it. I liked your point about commercialization defeating the spirit of punk rock. It's very true. You end up being victims of your own success. And it's something in sociology, there's this concept called recuperation. Are you aware of recuperation?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Yeah, it's so important to understand. I think for anybody in this space, especially, the idea is that subversive and even extremist movements can get brought into the fold of mainstream culture through a process of commercialization. And there's a bit more to it, obviously, but you see this time and time again in these movements. And I don't know, like on the other side of it is very reasonable. I can't deny that. But there's a strange sort of like death by success that happens in these forms of revolt, I suppose, that neuters the spirit, and so be it. But that concept is worth understanding for anybody who has been here thus far, because as you look at it, you're like, oh yeah, that's exactly what happened. They came in here and they started to clean house on some of the malcontents, and look at that. Now we have this like this sort of wonderful above board thing, or something about to be, that has also been rendered harmless.
Well, I guess kind of getting back to the what is Bitcoin question is that I think, I guess, to dial it in a little bit more for you personally, is everyone kind of got attracted to Bitcoin for different things, right? You had libertarians that came in for obvious reasons with issues with central banks and all that, or I guess you kind of classify us into either 1,000-page or 50-page, libertarians, and
Right.
kind of what your outlook is. But there was other people that kind of came in. I mean, there's even socialists that are attracted to it for one reason or the other. But some people they liked it because it was going to end central bank, or it was a more fair monetary policy, or whatever it may be. So, what was, I guess, more important than what is Bitcoin, but why was Bitcoin important to you in those early days, and what, if anything, has changed to kind of either soil you on that concept, or just kind of no longer see it as being a use case?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, Bitcoin, I discovered Bitcoin in 2011, and I thought it was interesting, but I didn't think it had any real value until Silk Road came around. And then I started using it, and I said, well, this thing has actual obvious use value, and I'm in. I think this is great. And so that's what got me excited. For all kinds of reasons, really. But I mean, you even touched on earlier. It's like this notion of the underground currency, um, and yeah. So I mean, I could talk about those old days, perhaps, if we care. But like moving to the present, I guess what kind of now is a bit of a bummer, I have to say, is that Bitcoin really doesn't offer much in the way of fungibility anymore. It has become Fedcoin, in my mind, at least, and that's not necessarily bad, because like the price has gone up commensurate with that goal. Um, and that's wonderful. I cannot complain about that. But at the same time, again, it's lost some of the original energy and spirit now, for those reasons. And like I said, I think that like Monero, or who knows what else. I mean, even Zcash, these types of currencies will offer a lot of that value. But along with the sophistication of the market, it does seem like the feds are imposing regulations onto the Wild West that makes it a lot less fun, fortunately.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm really hearing is kind of more you appreciate whoever's kind of right on the edge, right? Whoever is allowing kind of that fringe use case or that underground use case more than the kind of larger pontificated philosophical reasons for why Bitcoin, or what Bitcoin could do. It's more about the kind of the counterculture.
Yeah, I think so. I do enjoy the conversations about what Bitcoin could do. I've soured to some of it because it's been just absolutely like overrun by cheap talk without
Yeah.
action. So that has been a bit of a bummer. But I do believe in the potential. Um, what candidly has happened in a lot of ways is that the talent has been paid to leave. It's really just kind of like how that works, and you see this even in punk rock, where Sid Vicious gets paid to leave. He was part of the movement, and the society comes. It takes the all star affinities that are high performing participants, and it says, "Here's some money, now go." And invariably they do, because it's kind of like a carrot or a stick. It's like either you're going to take the money or you're going to end up in a cage, I suppose. And people go with the money, and as well they should. But yeah, it's I think with the countercultural side of it, what I will say is that I was advised in my youth that the talent goes where the action is. And I've taken that mantra to heart, and I followed it for most of my life. And it kind of led me to places that are on the edge. That's where the action is. And it's not to say that your fortune will lie there, but it is certain that some people's fortune will lie there. And that's a great place to look for fortune. And it's paid off very well for me, I would say. So that is advice that if you have courage and stamina and wits, is worth pursuing.
No, I agree. And I've mentioned this for the listeners. They probably are getting tired of me mentioning this concept within permaculture. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that with permaculture at all.
I
But
don't think it's a word,
it's
but that's about it.
yeah, a lot of people mostly associate it with gardening or whatever, and that's a big part of it. It's kind of where it first got its start, was in kind of creating, instead of working against nature, trying to do straight lines, excuse me, you will work with nature, right? You try to find the natural flows and patterns within nature. And then, so you're not trying to like cut all these trees down to plant your plot. You're finding where there's areas or where you can, put different trees. Anyways, and you kind of, one of the, one of the things within permaculture is that the edge effect, and that at the edge of every system is where there's the most productive. So at the edge of the forest, at the edge of the savanna, at the edge of the desert is where you're going to see the most productive portions in that system. And I think that's kind of where you're getting at, is that the fringe of culture, where counterculture is kind of conflicting with the current culture, is kind of where you see where Bitcoin, first kind of the little guppies started to swim and get a little bit bigger, and now it's kind of swam off into the mainstream, and now maybe there's yeah, I do agree. I think if you look into the fringes, that's if you're looking for when you're going to see the advertisement on NBC about something and a new great way to make money, then it's already too late. um there was another thing. I was listening to some old Bitcoin Unlimited episodes a while back, and you talked about Bitcoin being a natural Ponzi. I was wondering if you could deep dive a little bit into that concept, what that means, because at first I think some folks would probably cringe a little bit by the word Ponzi being attached to anything that they love. So I was wondering if you could kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I understand the cringe. I mean, the connotation is negative, certainly, but these things do happen. That term was introduced by the World Bank, and it describes Bitcoin, and I think it describes it well. Um, what I think is left out of that description is that gold of any kind, digital or otherwise, if that's what this is a natural Ponzi, and so too are nations are natural Ponzi. So, like, what's actually probably more interesting in all of that is people. I get so frustrated when people like they want to reject what is very easily seen, and for me, it's like, well, that don't lose sight of the fact that like this thing is working. So like if it's associated, if it's like approximate to a negative connotation, that does not mean that this thing is all going to fail. It means that something interesting is happening, and like you said, this is where the border of the terrain is meeting some natural resource or some facility. Like you have to look there in the difficult spots because that's where you're going to find some real meat. So I don't know. Charles Ponzi had a very literal abstraction of like economic excess that he sort of discovered, and he took it to a degree of irresponsibility that soured the entirety of the proposition. But all of modern society is built on this concept that early investors are paid out by later investors. You see this in stocks. You see this again in nations. You see this all over the place, and it's a matter of degree. And then you have to drill down and say, like, okay, well, why is America a Ponzi and okay? And why is Amway a Ponzi and okay? And then why is BitConnect a Ponzi and not okay? And certainly Bitcoin falls in between these various points of the spectrum. And I think that these questions are worth asking because we're going to need to answer things like, well, this ICO is arrived, and could we have some kind of operational definition of what makes it a Ponzi or not? And unfortunately, what's going to end up happening is that the federal government's going to tell us where on the spectrum these things are. And it's unfortunate because we very easily could have, if we had coordinated better, spearheaded that discussion. Instead, we shied away from the problem, and in so doing, we hand the problem over to other authorities to solve. So, I mean, for me, like, I get a lot of slack, and not undeserved because, like, I egg people on, but at the same time, it's like lost in the discussion is where the meat and intent and value lies. And then like I don't do too bad with that. Like I usually just kind of like internalize it. I'll just be like, okay, well, I guess they're not ready for that. Fine. I'll take this on. And sometimes it explodes in my face, and I just end up with massive damages to myself. But other times it pays off handsomely. And as I've gotten older, I've come to realize that like the varying degrees of courage that I thought were more common around me are not in fact common. And perhaps that's the explanation. And perhaps I'm being insensitive by not understanding that. But at the same time, I think that, scared people themselves probably deserve more blame for their losses when it comes to these things than I deserve blame for bringing it to their attention. That's just me.
No, I think so. I mean, you got to play by the big boy rules, right? And I've always enjoyed, just following you on Twitter because you're just the constant contrarian to everything in the space, which is, I think, is an important thing because I think that there's two. Well, contrarians are never appreciated, right,
No,
by any in group because
never.
the contrarian's always the one who is, no one likes the doubter of the faith. And the contrarian, although necessary, is kind of like, I mean, to constantly use these religious terms, but kind of the prophet, right, where they're kind of pointing out where the nation or whatever the group is failing, and nobody ever likes that, right? They gave Socrates hemlock, so just be careful at the conferences. But I think that the in-group preference, and especially, everything's on Twitter, and Twitter really makes it easy to coddle your own in-group preference through muting, through blocking, and you end up with these beautiful little walled gardens where, at some point where some of these people, I don't think they ever talk to anybody outside of, whoever is liking and retweeting their stuff and patting them on the back for kind of these inane, very topical takes on everything that's going on.
It's true.
And I think it's a bad thing. I think it's probably, I don't know. I think it leads to stagnation of thought and lack of introspection, and especially as to what Bitcoin's ideals are. I don't really think there's been a lot of talk about what Bitcoin's ideals are, and I think that this lack of discussion is probably one of the larger attack vectors that we have, because we're not being introspective. We're not talking. We're just slapping each other on the back and saying that it's all going to be okay.
I fully agree. I don't know that it's necessarily bad. I go back and forth on that because like there's a few directions Bitcoin can go in, and we don't know which way it'll go yet. So like it's definitely, this has been disappointing for me watching punk rock turn into a religion, just full fledged in every sense of the word, as best I can tell. Religion has been a little disappointing because it does stagnate the development, and it also creates an obstinacy and zealotry that is infuriating for anybody who's trying to apply this technology, as is evidenced by every single company that has tried to come into the space and do something with Bitcoin, where they are almost immediately mocked, jeered at, and removed from the space for reasons that are not really well considered. And I'm not innocent. Like a lot of that stuff, I found myself. I see how it happened. I myself played a big part in. I think, but there's a point at which I think it kind of took on a life of its own to a degree now that it's just incredibly obtuse. Um, and yeah, it's good in the sense that you very well may stand a chance of this just becoming outright religion, like Scientology or one of these. I don't know if that's too grand, or not grand. I really have no idea. But it does seem to have that sort of spirit to it, like an internet religion. Maybe that's what this is. You never know. Um, and if that's the case, then like this is the degree of commitment that like Apple had typically cultivated to great success. So even though you had these diehards for a while that kept the company along when it was otherwise in the doldrums of the early 2000s, they were keeping it along mostly through um, ideological reasons. It was a degree of zealotry. So maybe Bitcoin has that. Maybe that's good. On the other hand, it may very well be that Bitcoin does become the MySpace of cryptocurrency because of an inability to iterate and lead against competitors.
Well, that'd be so sad if Satoshi became Tom. That'd just be. But I think I absolutely, when I look, the more I look at it, because in conversations with Vin, it makes it a lot easier for me to understand Bitcoin when I understand this space as kind of competing religions.
Yeah.
Um, and I do think that Bitcoin is, and I'm not going to go over a previous episode that I did that I've mentioned on the last probably every one since then, but I had a talk with a gentleman who was a psychologist, and he was just talking about the lack of the, or I should say, the destruction of traditional institutions has led people to look for those kind of same rituals, practices, and meaning in other places. And I think that Bitcoin has as well. And I don't think Bitcoin would have been successful without it. Kind of these, and then these zealots that form around it to kind of, I guess, protect it against sometimes wrongly and sometimes rightly against incursions and attempts to change it. But I mean, you look at it, we have rituals, we have practices within Bitcoin BTC. We have running your own full node, hodling, and especially running your full node is really kind of the high sacrament probably of Bitcoin. We have specific holidays that we
Yeah.
that we celebrate, even though people don't like to call themselves leaders or whatever. There is absolutely leadership in my mind of some form or another within Bitcoin, and kind of
I fully agree. It's undeniable to me.
yeah,
But
the priests, there's the priests, and then there's the acolytes, and
there's the developers.
yeah.
There's the thought leaders, even miners. Like they're leading. It's just the early investors are leaders. A leader is just somebody who goes to a place before everybody else goes there. That's what it is to lead. You go first. It's really kind of a name. Yeah.
Well, what is the role of leadership in Bitcoin? Because like I said, we don't. A lot of people don't like to say there is no leadership. It's decentralized. Every node is a node is a node, right? But in truth, there's no CEO, but there are personalities who, if they get united, can make something happen or stop something from happening. And
No, of course, it's happened
they
many
stopped
times.
SegWit 2x probably most famously, and even though many of those same people,
The 13 hard fork
yeah,
is another one you may or may not know off the top of your
yeah,
head.
no, I was just coming into Bitcoin at the time, but I really wasn't really involved in I was a very topical kind of lurker at the time, so I wasn't in the inner sanctum of those kind of discussions, or I mean, like I wasn't really
We
participating.
we used to have a celebration of leadership back then. Like, granted, it wasn't quite pronounced to the degree that you would find in most communities. But there was Gavin as a lead maintainer who was unapologetic about that, and Jeff Garzik as well. So I think the class of like 13 were seduced by this no leaders meme, and then everyone kind of went with it because it pamped the bag, and then it just took off. uh, I don't know. I don't in myself. I didn't really see how it hurt. At the time, I don't think, but I see now how it really hurt. So
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of the same people that probably disagree with that statement also, you know, publicly celebrated the fact that they united to stop, SegWit 2X kind of had a little mini holiday just a few months back. Everyone was reposting pictures of their UASF hats and things like that. But, as far as the leadership of early adopters, devs, I don't know. It's hard to tell if the term is it influencer, thought leader, whatever it is.
well, if I can interrupt, I would even go so far at this point to say that when you are investing in any blockchain, you are investing in leadership, in the leadership of that blockchain. That's what I would say at this point. And we hit this history of Bitcoin as a rock that kind of worked for us for a good while. And in my mind, it was skeuomorphic. It was useful as an allegory of like what it is that we kind of believed in some tenet of the actual movement, but not to the degree that it became completely 100% literal and moral blindness was required in order to I guess invest and be part of the community. So yeah, I mean, the easy way to see that is the Bitcoin Foundation, which I love that project. It's one of my favorite projects in the space because it's hilarious. And it's hilarious for all kinds of reasons. The people who say there are no leaders immediately clam up when you bring up the Bitcoin Foundation and wait for a leader to speak to tell them what it is that they believe, which I find hilarious. They'll usually block you as well, it should be said. They'll sort of burn the book as a sort of stopgap measure on the blasphemy. But for those that don't know, the Bitcoin Foundation is a version of Bitcoin that has been around for a very long time, that has more or less promised to stay in accordance with the original Bitcoin code. And I would argue it's decentralized and leaderless. It is very easy to assemble on your own. Even if the source code were lost, it is at least close enough to the original Bitcoin design to where you could emergently consent on it with very little effort whatsoever. Unlike the current binaries today, which require an inordinate amount of time and specialization and labor to produce for anybody. There's maybe 50 people in the entire world that can do it, and there's really nothing about it that is how to say in accordance with the original code base as a point of like decentralized implementation. It is an extension of the code base, and I'm okay with that. To be clear, like I think Bitcoin Core was a fine idea. I think that we should iterate. My gripes are with the people who think we shouldn't iterate, who then simultaneously believe that the Bitcoin Foundation isn't the true BTC. So for me, I find that to be mostly funny at this point. And for any listeners, like look into the Bitcoin Foundation. Ask any Bitcoin leader, or an unleader who has a lot of followers and tells people what to think, what it is that they think about the Bitcoin Foundation, because there is no directive from the top yet to tell them what to think, so they'll generally gloss over the question. It's very funny.
Is this like, because I was just I googled it. Is this like an actual website, or is this just more of a meme concept of Bitcoin Foundation?
It's hilarious because it exists very much in the anarchist spirit of the old days. Murcha is an OG Bitcoiner. You can look that guy up. He has a fascinating story. I don't even want to tell it on the show. Let the audience look into it themselves. And he did that before that was even like a joke that anyone would understand. So like he gets full credit for like either making the joke or not. It's very up in the air. It's both funny and real. And so like you can look at it and say like, okay, this isn't real or this is a joke or whatever. But no, it does everything it says it's going to do, and it thumbs its nose up at anybody who cares about the provenance of ideas. So for me, that's a major win. That's totally punk rock.
And so, as far as for kind of coming back to with core, and I think that's when we talk about decentralization, I think that's the major issue that I have with this concept of decentralization in Bitcoin is that whenever you kind of bring up this idea of there being a core dev team of going, well, yeah, but there's hundreds or thousands of people that have that have submitted code to Bitcoin or everything like that, and true. But there's only a handful of people that have the ability to actually merge in GitHub.
Oh yeah.
And to me, that seems like such. I mean, when we were talking about the scaling issue, you're talking about either centralization of mining and that being an attack vector. But I mean, to me, I think if you really want to make Bitcoin much more censorship resistant at the dev level, these people really should not. But then there's a problem if they're not known. Then how do you hold people accountable either? But to me, it'd be really a lot simpler for there to be regulatory pressure on individuals than on miners per se. Whereas individuals don't have as much capital to fight, certain pressures, whereas a large miner may be able to. I don't know. It's kind of a horse apiece, and it's one of my major concerns with Bitcoin's ability to resist any sort of censorship attempts at the regulatory level.
Yeah, that's going to happen at some point. It left unabated. It's very obvious to me, at least, what'll end up. So I don't know why decentralization, for those that are relatively new, decentralization started with protocols like Tor and BitTorrent, and there was never any pretense of like a lifestyle adherence to this notion of no humans involved. That's when the religion kind of started to take hold in Bitcoin, where that sort of thinking became dominant and seemingly needed to apply to everything. Like the thing about BitTorrent was that it was a software project written by humans that was subject to all the whims of human software writing. And it did this thing by delegating varying forms of responsibility to people online. That part of the equation was where the decentralization came from. And in the case of BitTorrent, what it did was offload the uploading of files to random individuals. And it did that so that the developers didn't take on any liability for what was uploaded. That was sort of the deal. And I think that society has changed a lot since then, because at the time, the internet was less serious, maybe. And we all kind of thought, and I still think, yeah, and I still think, but that writing code was like a matter of free speech. And you should be able to write these programs with impunity. It was akin to writing mathematical formulas. And I still believe that. I find now, ironically, even in the blockchain space, that a lot of people don't seem to believe that. Instead, what they seem to believe is that, like, through magic, the non-humans create software, and that is what decentralization is. And that's just idiocy to me, through and through. And that's going to lead to a complete dead end. What'll end up happening with Bitcoin, as the Fed coin blockchain is what it seems to be doing, is one of a couple of things. But number one, because the banks have come in here and basically mopped up the entire space, and in good ways, to be clear, but we now have an inordinate amount of power held in exchanges, because exchanges hold the routing of fiat to authority. That's the power that exchanges have. So you have dollars. The United States has entrusted these banks to route those dollars to leaders, and they do that through the ticker symbol. So like BTC doesn't route to the Bitcoin Foundation; it routes to Bitcoin Core. In so doing, now the federal government gets to choose the rules of Bitcoin, and so they haven't exercised that power yet. But what will happen eventually, and they're already starting, is number one, in order to run a cryptocurrency exchange, they're going to have some level of central registration of tickers to leadership teams, the same way they do for stocks. And then number two, it's entirely probable that from there they'll go ahead and create a blacklist of sorts, or some such functionality wherein if you're going to run this executable on an exchange, you have to respect the blacklist. So either Bitcoin Core will be the reference by way of like some government extension. So it'll be like, the SEC Bitcoin Core, which will just be like the exact same thing as Bitcoin Core, but with like a blacklist applied, or some such thing. And the exchanges will follow, because they're not going to go to jail and not serve the community. They'd rather serve the community and not go to jail. And that's okay. Like that's fine by me. That's what Bitcoin will do. And who knows? It may actually be worth more in that environment. It wouldn't entirely surprise me, quite honestly. But this notion of the non-humans it's really perverse. But like anarchy themes generally just mean that somebody else has your authority. Like that is kind of the pitch of anarchy, is that we have no leaders, therefore we don't define any message, therefore any other person defines who we are. And that's kind of how that happens, and that's what's going to happen with Bitcoin. Is that any other person, in this case the most powerful, will define what is Bitcoin, and that's okay by me. But it is a bit incongruent with the spirit of things, and it didn't have to be that way. It could have gone another way. You look at like Tor. Tor is a great example of how it could have gone. So is ICANN. ICANN is so decentralized. It's amazing. It's amazing how decentralized ICANN is, and that's something you can't say in this space. And it's a shame, because if we had done it better, we could have absolutely have emulated that success.
Well,
and maybe you disagree. Maybe you disagree.
No, I don't necessarily disagree. I'm trying to figure out how. I mean, because this has been a problem that I've been thinking about. Is because if you just have open keys to the GitHub repository, right? Well, I think it already, having it done on something like GitHub that's owned by Microsoft is also probably not the best way. But I'm also not a programmer, so maybe there's probably a way that if, let's say, GitHub shut it down, there'd be other ways around that. So I may be speaking out of my ass on that point. But if you just had anybody and everybody, just pushing code out, and then keeping it, I guess it'd be up to the nodes to be able to choose which line. But it just seems like there'd be people accidentally running this version and that version. You have continual forks and then dead end, and I don't know. I don't know if necessarily, because the concept of leaderlessness is not something I think is possible. And I don't even think that's necessarily anarchic either, because, in anarchy doesn't mean necessarily there aren't leaders, but there's not coercive structures, where if you live within this area, you have to follow these rules, or there's some sort of social contract that you signed at birth. But I don't think that. I think that Bitcoin does need leaders. I think that the issue is that we need to be much more introspective, much more open to contrarian thinking, and the ability to talk through these things versus just accepting that whatever the basic social consensus is within a small group of people is the best way to go forward, and just go along with that. I don't know.
Well, I mean, there are easy solutions to these problems in history. We've actually the science of decentralization, I would advocate, is one of the oldest sciences there is, and these are problems we've had in humanity for thousands and thousands of years. And there's a few things that we could do that would make a huge impact. I think that the first thing that should be considered is that, number one, until there is a Bitcoin spec, the implementation is the spec. So you look at like HTML. HTML has a spec, and because HTML has a spec, we have all these different vendors. We have a Mozilla vendor, we have a Chrome vendor. Oh, maybe not all that many, but we have at least a significantly greater number of vendors than we have here, I think, in the Bitcoin space. And that's because there's a spec. So you have a specification, everybody agrees to the specification, and now you can create interoperable software. So that's fine. So if Bitcoin had a spec, that would solve an inordinate amount of problems. Except, unfortunately, there will never be a spec, because that isn't how consensus works. Unlike HTML, consensus requires bit-for-bit accuracy. So with HTML, you can do things like have pixels that are off by a bit. You can have font sizes that are substituted, that are approximated. And so any given web page, if you ask a developer, he can tell you like a mobile versus desktop. It's sort of like a approximate guide to how things should look. It's not an exact guide. Consensus has to have every single bit, bit for bit, the same across all computers in the space. So even if there was a spec that was very, 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 very good, there wouldn't be any sense in running an alternate implementation, because you're incurring risk for which you're uncompensated. Meaning, if the exchanges run Firefox, there's no reason to run Chrome whatsoever, because all Chrome will do is add risk that you don't understand. So you might as well run Firefox, because that's what the banks use, and you're at least guaranteed to go down with them if they go down, thus being a systemic risk, at which time there's no risk, because the bank will just revert back to an earlier block with the devs. And then that brings me to the second point, is that, and this is what blockchains always do, is if there's a systemic issue, we roll back. That's been true of Ethereum, rather famously with the DAO, but it's also been true of Bitcoin many times. We've seen this in multiple hard forks. The 13 fork was the most prodigious case of it. That it was very DAO-like. There was a sort of inconvenience to it that everybody decided to just not talk about, so we don't. But the record is fairly unequivocal. There was a fork. Luke Dash Jr., as well he should, went ahead and created an emergency patch, which everybody updated, and we all pretend like it didn't happen. In the more recent times, and this kind of gets into the security side of things. Frankly, I don't know that Microsoft and GitHub are really even the biggest attack vector. That the devs are just so easy to compromise, if you ask me. And you see this because the Bitcoin issuance rate was adjusted last year. I take that back. It was adjusted years ago by Blue Matt, and he did it for reasons that are unknown to us. But it went undetected and dormant until the newest CVE, at which somebody realized that, there was, in fact, an alteration to the code that allows an issuance of Bitcoin past the 21 million limit, and an emergency fix was released, and thankfully it didn't execute, because that would have been very embarrassing. And I don't want to necessarily accuse Blue Matt of malfeasance, but my point's the same, is that we can't assume benevolence either. Like what happened occurred, intent is unknown, and so prognosticating over the hows and whys of how an attacker would hit are now like resolved in the sense that, well, we know it can be done by this way, and maybe it was done. We'll never know.
Yeah, I mean, people are. I mean, that's always the we talk about that in Bitcoin as far as for being different from permission systems, right? Is that and I've done it as well. Is saying that, well, we don't have the single point of failure that, let's just say, I don't know, whatever, any kind of permission system you want to throw in there that has a central point of failure, has, because, you have, decentralization or whatever, right? But then you do have, where you have a handful of people, they are a point of failure, and that people are probably the most easily compromised systems in the world. And it doesn't take too much to be able to do that. And well, I mean, going back to the exchanges, as far as for being them kind of falling in line now, and exchanges have, I mean, they serve their function, and I don't really see any other way around it at the moment of, how do you get people with, whatever it is into Bitcoin. You have to use the exchanges, and it's a centralized choke point. Where they have to operate, and they're incentivized to. I mean, none of those people operating at Coinbase or a Bitfinex or anything like that or punk rock, and they're not looking to fight the system. They're looking to work within it and make money, as they, it's a free market system, and if that's what they want to do, they should do. But it does bring up uncomfortable questions within Bitcoin.
Well, it doesn't have to be uncomfortable. That's the thing that always drives me nuts. I understand why it's uncomfortable. People are scared. It's really just all it is. But
because we want perfection.
Censoring discussion, well, not only that, but like the confidence and affirmation is like the driving force of like everybody's modus operandi in this space. So like it's the culture. But the thing is that the censoring discussion doesn't make the problem go away. That's what's perverse to me. And I think these people think that if you censor discussion, the problem goes away. And that's not what happens. What happens is people like myself capitalize on the information gap, which is fine. I'm not complaining, but that only comes at cost to the people who are advocating censorship. It means that they and the general public that would conceivably have been in a position to benefit now don't benefit. And so I guess that's how finance works. Like for me, I think that I was compelled towards a more community spirit, given my early involvement. And that is my foul in retrospect. I think I can see why it was well-intentioned and nonetheless inappropriate. But yeah, I mean, this is how like Wall Street comes in and works. Now Wall Street's all about information secrecy, and perversely, like it's this very complicated but understandable chain whereby the investors end up abetting the confidence men in censoring information. And the only one who ends up losing is the investors. In any case, the point I was trying to make with this is like these are solved problems in many ways. And like we could have a cultural adjustment. Like I talk a lot about programming carbon and the supreme importance of programming carbon, which falls on deaf ears in this space. And it's a shame because all of our problems, or almost all of our problems, are due to this sort of this information gap. But yeah, like in the early days, like I remember how it was before there were exchanges, and I remember how we used to solve that problem. That is now lost knowledge, and unfortunately, we can't bring that knowledge back anymore for the reasons that we've already articulated. I mean, the simple answer is that you have local meetup groups where people meet and they use it, they use the product, and they get to know each other and they form networks and they perform quote unquote decentralized exchanging of bits for dollars. Now, I recognize that in recent years that's gotten increasingly difficult. And unfortunately, the reason why that's gotten increasingly difficult is because we censored the discussion on what we could have done about that. Tor also has this problem. With Tor, they've done a wonderful job of programming carbon. They've branded the product as this humanitarian thing, which it largely is capable of. I don't know if it largely is, but it doesn't matter. The point is the same: is that like running a relay node is an act of civic duty or freedom of information. And here in Bitcoin and blockchain, we took all of the energy, all of the enthusiasm, all of the confidence, and we squandered it rather than divert it into what I think would have been a much more effective appeal towards the right to exchange money freely. And you know what? Like that right may just quietly die one night. I've accepted this. I came from a time when you could use cash money and people didn't have to report every single one of their financial transactions to the federal government. And I thought that was a right. I thought that was normal. And now it seems like that discussion isn't even going to be had. And that's sad because that in many ways was, I think, the promise that Bitcoin could have fulfilled.
Well, if you could, educate the audience and myself a little bit more on what do you mean by programming carbon? I'm just not 100% familiar
Yeah.
with it.
So this is a refrain I picked out of one of the project management books that I've read over the years. It's not that unusual in computer programming circles to talk about this. Um, it's a bit vulgar in the sense that like it's dehumanizing, but it speaks to the better sense of programmers, which is why I promote it because they're the ones who need to hear this message because they know it's real. And yeah, the truth is that humans are deterministic largely, meaning they follow instructions in the same way computers do. And you know this because you drive. And when you drive on the right hand side of the road, and there is an error rate to your instructions and its execution. But by and large, you follow rules, you follow order, and you arrive at destinations 99% of the time or more because of all of the training and indoctrination, propaganda, and well-intentioned propaganda, but structure and the society has created for you to follow those goals. And it's a complicated science, and it's not something that grows overnight, and it requires so many things in order to come to fruition. But this is, in fact, how humans are controlled, and rightly so. So this is a property of machines that are made out of carbon, contrasting with the ones and zeros, which are instructions for the machines made out of silicon.
Okay, so I get it. I get your point. Much better when I was just confused by programming carbon, but as a carbon-based life form, got it. Yeah, no, I think that this kind of comes back a little bit to the concept of leadership too, because I think humans. I mean, leadership is kind of an aspect of humanity, right? We do, for better or worse, we are always a majority. I'd say where that breaks down is in fringe culture, to an extent. But people usually are looking for a leader, someone to tell them what programming to
Yeah,
run, what is the proper programming, and that's why people are attracted to all these. I mean, you look around at all these different, whatever it may be, goofy movements and things like that around the world, and go, how could people believe this stuff? Looking at, I don't know if you watched that documentary on Wild Wild Country on Netflix about the Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh.
I have not. I don't. I have not. I don't watch much TV,
Oh,
unfortunately.
okay. Well, it's a really interesting thing in kind of just the human experience in that. this was a cult, and used in the
Oh, I
appropriate
like
term.
that.
Yeah, not in the
Okay.
pejorative term, but he
I
was
love
in.
cults. Love them.
Yeah, I think that's Bitcoin is a cult in itself,
Yeah.
and we.
I should say I love watching cults and studying
Oh, okay.
cults. I
Less
don't want to
part.
be taken too much too creepy.
They
But
less
yes.
less participation, but they started. He started India, and he was kind of like the Indian kind of Hinduistic version. And not really, it's not really Hinduism per se, but I mean, kind of Indian subcontinent spirituality version of the prosperity gospel. Whereas his whole thing was that it's fine to make money, it's great to enjoy pleasures and all this kind of stuff. Don't that enlightenment is not found in starving yourself half to death, right? And this was kind of in a period of the 70s and 80s where people were traveling and looking for meaning, and they flocked to him. They ended up buying this huge area in Oregon, um, where he had multiple, Benz, Rolls Royces, and things like that. And they ended up basically taking over the town. They tried to take over the county, and there's people being poisoned right before elections so that they could win an election. It was a whole thing. But I think that regardless in it, looking from the outside in, you go like, well, how could people believe that, or Heaven's Gate, things like that. But people are always, I think, looking for that carbon programming for themselves. They're looking to be told what is the appropriate action, and then that's how they can. From that, they run their, they can the programming can kind of run in itself, and that's kind of the interesting thing that I find about Bitcoin as well. Is
Oh,
observing that.
absolutely. There's a lot of exciting research happening on this front lately. As a result, I think of all of the craziness we're seeing online. Just today, there was a post on Y Combinator, public opinion in authoritarian states, excuse me, and it talks about how there's generally like a primary goal that humans have that causes them to want to do something. So they find like-minded others, at which time they then will compromise on their own identity or their own personality for the sake of belonging to that group. And then that process, it seems like it just kind of keeps on accelerating. And there's a few, I'm trying to think of the name. It's escaped me off the top of my head. I was just talking about it in the Prior Patch today with Paul Sports. But there's a name for that economically, and it'll come to me here by the end of the show. And it's really exciting research because it explains a lot of weirdness that's happening right now. And it's been happening for like, I think, thousands of years, but that we haven't really been able to study until recently with some of the new data that's been coming in based on all of the social media stuff happening. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the cult. There's like you'll notice with the cult that like the identities start to dissolve, like the pre-cult identity, and then the cult itself seems to merge into one identity. So all members then become defined by that, and you see that here at Bitcoin, where like these people probably had personal lives, but you never really see that here in our space. And I bet you our Bitcoin identity permeates to their like social nodes outside of Twitter and Reddit, and yeah, from there it becomes like an echo chamber. And from what I see, like I'm not a professional here, but it seems to regress to like the id in psychology, wherein like there's the immediate gratification that seems to end up being where you always end up. So as more people join, the denomination then becomes generally less specialized, and as a result, I think more prone to um, basic functions of thought. So things like hygiene, like shitcoins, being the obvious case, as like a sort of uh, easy place to draw consensus from. Because since nobody's specialized, you can't draw it from literature or even maybe contemporary events, because maybe this is like internationally based demographic. So instead, you sort of pull from like poop, and then you have these conversations that go on all day about the poop and hygiene qualities of these bits and these ticker symbols. And yeah, the whole thing is really fascinating to me. I don't think we've ever seen it happening quite this way. We have seen it historically many times, but not at like light speed and not with such a diverse range of individuals as it seems to be happening online now. preference falsification. That's what it is. Preference falsification. And I think that stands a chance of becoming like a major economic uh, force of understanding. Now that we've figured out what the hell is going on, and like I think the quintessential example of preference falsification is communism in Russia, which this is hilarious to me. I don't know why people don't see humor in things where I see it. I think some things are just so funny to me. And then like you say to people, and they're like horrified. They're like, oh, really? I thought that was so funny. But yeah, so apparently there are as of now no communists in Russia. There were never any communists. Nobody ever knew any communists. In fact, if you ask people about communism, the shame is yours for asking, because only an idiot would think there ever were communists. And so like that leaves me like mystified, because I remember growing up seeing very vivid images of communists in Russia. And what it seems to be the case is that as these groups conform onto a herd identity, be it a cult identity or otherwise, the herd identity ends up being so far removed from any individual in the herd that individuals will seemingly know that they're acting in some capacity, and they will present in a way that advances them in the herd, but which they themselves have no personal attachment to. And then at a time where, in the case of Russia, the Berlin Wall came down, and it was evident to everybody that the game was over. This is the slow clap. Also, is kind of like the same effect, where like one person claps in the room, and then two people clap, and then three people clap, and then before you know it, everybody claps. Right at that time, that mediated identity is no longer valid. So at that time, everybody knows that the jig is up, and they then start renegotiating a new identity. And in fact, in the new identity, the virtue would be having distanced yourself from the old identity. So that's what like the starting point is, like, well, I was never a communist. I was just pretending to be a communist. I was never a real communist. The real communists were terrible, awful people. And you have to go ask somebody else, because I haven't seen one of those around here. Like that's what ends up happening. And that's what will happen in Bitcoin. Guaranteed. At some point, what's going to end up happening is the slow clap, and the shamans of today will disappear, and everyone will disavow themselves of any degree of social proximity to those people. And then we'll be on to the new round, which will be probably more ridiculous than the current round, if I had to guess, but at least a refreshing change would be my hope. And the process would begin anew.
No, I absolutely agree. I think that this has happened a long time. And especially if you look in the kind of the American experience, probably post-Reformation as far as for the West, where there's just an explosion of different groups and things like that. But it's been really hard to study, even up until probably, like you said, just recently with social media. It allows you to see, and this is what I find it fascinating as well, is that, prior, in the 70s, you had, different cults and groups and movements, but a lot of the evidence of what was said, who was involved, what they said, the followers of those groups was, it's either hearsay or second and third hand stories that, are 30, 20, 50 years later, whatever it may be. Whereas now you can see pretty much in real time, and to an extent saved, although I hate this trend in Twitter of people having these deletion, kind of almost kind of like these reconciliation exhortations of their past, where they do these mass deletions of everything that they talked about.
It's very dishonest and cowardly. Very dishonest and very cowardly. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I get to an extent where if you said something that you no longer, like where if you, let's just say you're saying Herbalife was the best thing ever and everybody should join it, that 3 years later, after you realize what's going on, that you delete that sort of thing. But where you're making qualitative statements on something that you believe, I don't know. I find it to be really weird to do that. But I do like how social media does allow for this kind of more deep dive study. And I think that it's more of a boomer mentality of going, well, this is, God, this is all brand new, and all these kind of, groups on the internet that are kind of forming. Like we said, it's happened, and it's just that now we're actually able to see it, quantify it, and kind of record it. Whereas before, the boomers and what they were doing back in their, teenage years and 20s and 30s was not so much. But with Bitcoin, I agree, follows a lot of this same thing, and it's I don't know, it's really interesting to see the Bitcoin cult and so many people, when you say that, get completely turned off and bothered by it. But I think that it perfectly encapsulates what Bitcoin is. And like I've said, I don't think it would be where it is today if it had not developed into it, for good or bad.
There's a lot of deference to magic in society, or at least has been up until the internet. And I see this like in my dad and his generation. And if you pay attention, you'll find it too now, I suspect. And there's like this sort of mysticism of the unknown, that it is a form of social cohesion and has been for a long time. And so I think what ends up happening is like, I guess in prior years, the people like respected the unknown more. So like when weird societal things happened and nobody offered any degree of understanding, it was just like everyone was content to let it go. And nowadays, I don't really accept that. I'm not even proud of this because like I can make a good case of why this is like antisocial behavior. But it's also like I'm a grown ass man. I only have one life to live, and damn it, I'm not going to just let things slide. It's not that I want accountability. I want understanding, and I want to work towards improving. Honestly, just the degree of interactivity between myself and the people around me. And yeah, I think that like the internet kind of destroys a lot of the appeal of ignorance, and so I think there's a lot of people like demanding answers, like why was it that all of a sudden everybody felt this way? Like I don't know, we can take I don't know where we are politically, but like this sort of like feminism wave that like invaded Twitter around the time of the election in 2016, like for better or worse, whatever you think, like that was unprecedented. But at the same time, everybody involved in that were championing how long they were this identity, which had never shown up before, and all of a sudden was everywhere. And now it seems to have subsided significantly. Maybe I'm not seeing what you guys are seeing. Maybe the algorithms are changing things, but it's like I want answers, and I don't want to hold anyone responsible. I don't want to like tell people that like they need to like be banished. I just want to know what the fuck happened. I'm not going to like let that go to ignorance without some resolution around me. And we're getting answers, and it's good. It's exciting because I think what will end up happening, truthfully, is that I don't know. Maybe my faith is in reason, and other people's faith is in ignorance. But like I think that with the reason will come preventative steps to prevent people from going out of control ultimately. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this will be like the end of humanity, and I was like made a big mistake. But I don't think that, and I don't think that many people do think that that are like semi to well educated internet denizens.
I don't know. I'm torn on where I would agree that I would rather know. I would rather find out why these things, and I'm along the same lines as well. I don't think that it should be some sort of modern day, Salem witch trial sort of thing, where we're constantly, because I mean the cancel culture, I guess, kind of goes into that, where people are
Yeah,
constantly looking for a reason why you should hate this person, or even if you don't even have a reason to, people will just dig. There's just that case. There was that guy who held up that sign. I can't remember, was it some sporting event asking for money to raise for like kids cancer research, something raise, I can't remember the donation address or QR code. I can't remember exactly. And someone dug into his like old social media and they found something. I can't remember what it was said, if it was some racist or homophobic, joke that he'd made, like when he years and years and years ago. And it was used to just ruin this person, where all he had done, it's not like he'd made a political statement either. He was just raising money. And it went viral, and a lot of good was, and somebody felt the need to try to dig it up because I guess they feel that their social standing. And that's the weird thing about the internet, is that we have more information now than ever. I remember, you were probably the same way. I grew up in a very small town, so we had like one tiny little library, and that's basically where all the world's knowledge was, outside of NBC News and Star Trek: Next Generation. And now you have it in the palm of your hand. You can find anything, but it seems like most people spend their days trying to use that access to information just so they can shit on other people. Um,
yeah,
and I don't know. To me, it almost seems like we're becoming less reasoned and less educated the more
yeah.
access that we have to reason and education.
It is true. Adam Curtis did a phenomenal movie on this that is not as popular as his other movies. I believe it's like All Watched Over by the Machines of Love and Grace is the name of the movie. It's like a 5-part series, It's hard to get in America. If you can get it, he talks about. Um, it's a really unfortunate and complicated issue that I think drives a lot of this. Like there's a cycle of um, vengeance and virtue that humans seem to need in many cases, wherein like in order to ascend the social hierarchy and receive dopamine as a member of society, you must banish the deviants or the other, and who the other is or who the deviants are irrelevant. So even if there are no deviants or others, then what will happen is you'll look to your own group to find somebody who is the fringiest member, and you will make him the other or the deviant, so that you can banish him, thus receiving the affirmation of your peers. And I'm not innocent of that. I do that. I would be the first to admit I too am human, and I do this thing. And as I'm getting older, I'd like to think I'm getting better about it. But we have emotions, and we are captive to them. So who knows? Like you guys can evaluate that in me, maybe. But it is a very unfortunate thing. It's another way of putting it is familiarity breeds contempt, and that is just like brutal, and it seems really true. You'll just see like this affects people's in their personal relationships, where like it's just nothing happened but familiarity, and then the narcissism of petty difference creeps up, and then before you know it, it's like a bloodbath over block size, and this it goes so stupid, but it is a matter of great principle, and that's that, and that is the cycle of humanity.
Well, if you look at humanity, just history, is that I think that the only great unifier in humanity has always been, persecution of the other. It's where we always come together. I shouldn't say of humanity, but within, groups of humanity, where you see the greatest unification, even among disparate groups, once they find that other that everybody hates. So within Bitcoin, I'd probably say it's probably Craig Wright, where everybody comes together to hate him. But then outside of that, once you're done with that Twitter thread, then it goes back to, World War II's over, and now we're at the throat of the Soviets. But even if you look at sports teams, you go, oh well, we unified in our love for the Jets or the Patriots or whatever, but we're only unified in the hopes that we can defeat the other. And I mean, I think that we're really far away from kind of moving to that, and it's sad that we can't be unified in a form of compassion and I guess love, I guess, to kind of get a little bit more kind of like woo woo with it. But it's unfortunate that we can't do that. It always has to be conflict based, and it always has to be at the expense of another group versus at the benefit of another group.
I think the Eastern tradition does a better job than the Western tradition on some of these themes. But it's like very bittersweet, and it may be just damning. But like the humans are most impressive when they're just like engaged in a battle with their mortal enemy. So like if you want to go to the moon, you need a Cold War, and you need to bring the Earth to like the verge of destruction. And it shouldn't be that way. Like you'd think that the humans would be aligned enough in their goals to just like put down the weapons and just go to the moon, so that we could like ensure a better future for all involved. But no, it seems like we have to do this crazy dance with each other, where we are effectively savages, and on great scales, horrific scales, and in that way we can devise a rocket ship, and then that theme is recurring. We were talking about this in the Briar Patch today too. I don't even care to plug the channel, but it's just these are very topical at the moment, I think. And another point I'd say in all of this too is that like I don't know if do you have much experience moderating forums, channels?
A little bit, enough to know that it's an absolute nightmare.
Right. Okay. So like this is something like I'm used to being in environments where when I have a problem, I go to the books and I just read, and I find that the problem. I mean, I'm a computer programmer by training, I suppose that's a relevant description, but I'm a computer programmer, at least where I have been for most of my life. And so when you're going to learn a new language, or you have like I have to like interoperate with a database, you go to the literature and you pull the book off the shelf and you read, and then 8 hours later maybe you're like, okay, I have a pretty good idea of what needs to be done. However, there's this glaring hole. There's this giant hole in all of our knowledge about moderation. And this is a problem that you'd think that like everybody has dealt with and everybody has seen, and there should be like a litany of books about. And there are actually a litany of books about, but it's like dire and dour, and it's just really hard. And there's no easy. It's not 8 hours, and like no one's really figured it out. It's just got like these stories of the Crusades and like these awful times and like these moments of like clarity that are fleeting. And it's just like all you wanted to do was like keep a room of like 50 people from mutinying, and it's very very hard. And like you need you need like these very vulgar resolutions. You got to kind of be a bit of an asshole, unfortunately, and like in the way that like no one wants to hear. You got to like tell lies to people. You have to be double faced. You have to. This is what politics is. And then like it's such a great burden to have any individual face without any training at all. And it's a shame that every one of us has been tasked with this in some incremental or significant way in the last few years online. Everybody from like our mothers starting a sewing club that gets contentious about something, to Bitcoin, which gets contentious about everything. What? And you can't just go to a website and read like a very quick guide on how to solve this problem. Or if you can, it's going to be like so reductionist as to be like laughable, and you're just like, okay, well, this doesn't apply to my problem. Well, at least that's been my experience, and I think yours as well, judging by how you introduced the issue. Um, like that's not to say there aren't solutions, but it requires work from everybody. Like it's not the moderator's job, even principally. You got to make people hungry. It's like the room's got to be starving, and then now we have a culture and a medium by which we can create something worth growing. And that's sad because like right now we're all fat and happy. And what I suspect is the Bitcoin needs to get kicked in the gut a few times before people will want to absorb a new way of doing things. And so be it. Like that'll happen. So be it. But it's it didn't have to. It just doesn't. It sounds to me like that's a bit, I don't know, inefficient. Let's say.
Well, it kind of leads me to my thought on. I wrote an article a while back on forks and that kind of being maybe a concept of a conflict resolution for people in general. Going into the future, this idea of because forks is something totally different from say like in a normal kind of meat space society, right? Where if you don't like what's going on in the United States or something like that, if you want to, let's say go back to the Civil War, if you wanted to leave, that is not something that they're going to be that's going to be looked, not looked down upon and not bringing conflict. Whereas a fork, it's contentious. People are angry, and they're still angry years later. But I mean, at the end of the day, it was bloodless, right? We forked, and two communities out of one, or second community, was created, and everybody just kind of went on their way. And then after that, it was just mainly just verbal sparring. After that, probably a little bit of politicking and stuff behind the scenes. But I wonder if that's a way that we can go forward as we become more and more digital. And I always have, maybe this is just, technological hopium and utopianism, which it probably mostly is, just to give away that humanity is. But as we become more digital, I wonder if it'll be easier to become less contentious, and where people can just have the ability to find like-minded people, and that in-group is fine. If that echo chamber is fine. Whereas there's no actual geographic location and property per se that is in danger of, that's not a scarce resource, I guess, that you need to worry about, where people can just kind of go in their own little directions. They don't have to fight over a scarce resource such as geography or actual resources, or even in Bitcoin per se. And they can go off on their own and live their own happy lives. And if you don't like the way eventually down the road that group is doing, you split off into your own group, almost kind of like subreddits, I guess, in a way. And I wonder if that's a way, if the Benedict option, in the kind of the more of the Catholic tradition, is a better way for, just kind of remove yourself from the world, so to speak, is the best way to go.
I like that plan. I've heard it phrased in other ways, and I think it's well articulated here. And that's what kind of what the exchanges do. Like you aren't, despite what you see the fanatics tell you on Twitter, you're not married to your bits and your block size. You're able to just hit a button and convert from one leadership team to the next. And I think that that's probably pretty close to what we want. I don't know that. I mean, here's kind of where I'm at with some of this is like roughly there's like two realms of community organization. There's organizing the starving and organizing the full. And so when you have like a company, let's say Microsoft, you're organizing the starving because if they don't do what you tell them, they will starve. And while yes, there's like they can switch to a different employer, there's still ramifications in the sense that like they have to explain their work history, and they you and they are like tied in a degree that like there's an owing in some capacity in their future expectations of eating. So that's one realm, and that's like the conventional realm. Now, organizing the full, the people who are already satiated, I forget how to pronounce it, but need to be organized. That's generally the realm of traditional politics. So in the United States, that would seem to be the realm of Republicans and Democrats. And what happens there is extremely, extremely complicated. But I think that here in Bitcoin and blockchain, we are effectively in that realm, no matter what. Because even if like the price is down, almost everyone's going to have a normal job, so they're not actually going to be starving, like literally. Even though like commensurate with the price, they may have like lost I don't know 20 years off their retirement, but they're hopefully getting money in the door. So it's going to probably have to embody something closer to like a national politics style. Now, that being said, like it may very well be that each of these forks are political parties. That would be nice to see. I do think that if that is the realm in which we're going, that Decred is just a sleeper hit. I maintain that Decred is the largest Bitcoin development team. They've done an excellent job of not promoting that, even though that's what I see very obviously to me, is that it is a Bitcoin fork that is very well governed comparatively. I'm sure there are tons of flaws and scandals and things that I've heard bits and pieces of, but compared to like Bitcoin, it's remarkable. So yeah, I don't know. I will say that it's a bit weird in that the first mover advantage has the Wall Street attention in a way that might incentivize everybody in the space to just deprecate Bitcoin. Like I could totally see that happening. It's an unpopular thing to hear. I've got solutions that nobody wants to hear to that problem that work very, very well. But even still, it may end up being that there has to be a mutiny of the first mover in order to facilitate this fork model. And I wouldn't be surprised if that happens, quite honestly. We'll see. The reason I say that is because like, we are allegiant to America. And then as a second layer underneath that, or over it, take a pick, the parties, either Democrats or Republicans. So that doesn't exactly work here in Bitcoin because the Bitcoin cultural product, the flag that is flown, belongs to a single leader, one single leader. And then anybody who tries to wave that flag is deemed incidental or tangential, seemingly, by the exchanges. So I think that's how that works. I could be wrong.
Well, I guess I kind of led into. I'll make this my kind of my last. Well, yeah, probably should. We've been going on for almost an hour and a half, and I know it's a little bit later there in Florida, but I wanted to go into the. You mentioned it just a minute ago. Was the concept of the briar patch that you have developed, and I was wondering if you. I mean, I know that it's a pretty complicated topic with a lot of layers, but I was wondering if you could kind of go over that concept and kind of give a introductory to intermediary, I guess, overview
Yeah.
of that concept.
It's not popular these days, but like in the Southern tradition, we have Uncle Remus Tales, and it is a compendium of Southern Dixieland stories that has fallen out of favor for reasons that are understandable. But I think we threw the baby out with the bathwater, and there's some amazing stories in there that are so relevant and are censored in the public discourse. In any case, One such tale is the tale of the Briar Patch. And there's a rabbit, Brer Rabbit, and he finds himself meeting two thugs on the road. The two thugs are imbeciles, and nonetheless they're out to do him harm. These two imbeciles are roughly representative of the vast majority of so-called leaders in this space, wherein they're so led and blinded by spite and animosity that their executive function has ceased to operate, and they just do the opposite of what the target of their ire does. So it's reverse psychology. So the rabbit tells these thugs that the worst thing that could happen to the rabbit is to be thrown into the briar patch. And so dutifully, the two thugs throw him into the briar patch. Well, unknown to the thugs, the rabbit's home was the briar patch, and he was very happy there, and he escaped their wrath. And that's the end of the story. And so the briar patch is effectively a place where people who see things that way seem to end up, or have friends that see things like that. And it is a place of political incorrectness, to say the least. I try to moderate. It's kind of a lost cause, but I try my best. And the goal, generally, as best I can tell, of the channel is to ascend the conversational hierarchy. I forgot what it's called. Do you know this hierarchy conversation wherein like the bottom layer is just like pejorative slurs, and then the top layer is discussing the point? Hierarchy of discussion, I think. Is that what it's called? I'm looking this up now.
Oh,
yeah, it's the hierarchy of discussion. Right. So I'm doing my best to move us from this hierarchy of discussion wherein we start at name calling, we move up to ad hominem, and then we respond to tone. And then at the very top, there's a few other steps. We refute the central point. Some days are better than others. I have to say the stock in this space is piss poor. Quite frankly, we've got a lot of people who are very low on the hierarchy. They themselves are not much better than the thugs. But it's better. It's better than a lot of the alternatives. It may be the best worst system that we have. I don't know. Quite frankly, I don't even want immigrants coming. Like you guys would be great, fine and good. I don't know if I want you there. Yeah. If you could find out how to get there, I guess that's a good like standard bar. It's not very hard. At the same time, I don't want to make it so easy for you that you just walk in on impulse. I want you to at least expend a little bit of sweat finding out how to get there. And then if you get there, you can engage with others, hopefully of like mind, where they talk all fucking day. Like I'm in there as much as I can. I like it there, but I'll be damned if it isn't probably one of the most active Telegram groups of the space. It's taken on a life of its own. I may regret this, so I have to be honest. But for the time being, at least, it's staying afloat.
And where can people find you, engage with you, and where's the best place to basically get all of the stuff that you're putting out?
Deroise on Twitter, DEROSE. Start there. And you can check me out on ChrisDeroise.com. I don't even try to promote myself anymore at this point. Like I love the space. Like I'm just sort of like this guy who I feel like either I've earned my place or not. I don't really care. I have everything I need in the space, and if you need something from me, like you can come reach out to me, and that's fine and good. But I'm okay not being promoted also.
Well, I will actually promote you. So if you go to digiknowcrypto.com
Wonderful.
/EP53, you'll find basically all the links and notes to articles or podcasts or whatever else that we talked about will be located there. The link to the Briar Patch will not be, as you'll have to take the hero's journey to try to find your way there.
There you go.
But Chris, I really appreciate your time tonight. It was a great
Same.
discussion.
This was wonderful.
Yeah, and I hope to have you on again soon.
Anytime.
As always with Bitcoin, there's always constant there's always constant discussions and new things that are emerging that kind of coincide and are influenced by kind of the cultural shifts and just things that are happening in the world. So we'll always probably have a plethora of things to on our plate to talk about. So, but thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.